Paul, Billy Burke Skyping with his child, Martin, Gabrielle Bateman, late around evening time while he's working at a life-sized model processing plant. Martin lets his dad know that his mom, Sophie, Maria Bello, has been acting oddly of late. Paul lets Martin know that things will improve. Paul's aide, Esther, Lotta Lawson, is securing the distribution center. At the point when she goes to switch out the lights in one of the rooms, a figure shows up toward the rear of the room. She sees the figure, and when she goes to walk out on, it vanishes. She switches the lights ease off and the figure returns. She turns the lights on and it vanishes. She does this 2 additional times, and on the 4th time she switches out the lights. The figure shows up right in front of her. She promptly walks out on and goes to tell Paul. She goes to inform Paul concerning the figure. She hinders him as he's in his Skype call with his child and lets him know that she saw somebody who then vanished. He excuses it and advises her to go home. Before long, he goes to secure it for the evening. As he is going to leave, he recollects everything that Esther said to him about seeing somebody. In this way, he strolls through the scarcely lit distribution center. Ultimately, he runs over a similar figure. It's squatted down in an obscured region of the stockroom. It sees Paul and begins to get up. All of a sudden, one of the lights above Paul switches off on the grounds that its movement is distinguished. Paul swings his arms around the light to inspire it to return on. It does, and presently the figure is nearer to him than it initially was. Paul sees this and takes off. As he goes through a little fix of haziness, the figure paws his leg, sending him to a lit aspect of the ground with a horrendous cut. He gets up and sees the figure before him, remaining in the obscurity. He sees that it's standing right at the edge of the ground where the haziness closes. He sorts out that it can't go in the light, yet all the same just in obscurity. Once more, Paul takes off, limping as far as possible back to his office. He locks the entryway and snatches a home run stick. Out of nowhere, the lights begin glimmering and in the end go off, leaving him out of the loop. The idea about the entryway begins to wiggle as the figure attempts to get in. In the end, the entryway opens up somewhat. Paul gets ready for it to assault, yet he's abruptly pulled from behind into the dell. His disfigured carcass is dropped off someplace on the opposite side of the stockroom. A couple of days after the fact, Martin is going to nod off when he hears what sounds like his mom conversing with somebody. He clears his path through the corridor to her room, where apparently she is conversing with somebody in an obscure restroom. At the point when Sophie sees Martin remaining by her room, she says, "Please accept my apologies. Did we wake you?" He starts to get terrified. However, Sophie advises him to nod off. He starts to stroll back to his room. He thinks back to see Sophie remaining at the entryway of her room, and furthermore sees a dreadful hand at the side of the entryway too. Martin runs back to his room and locks the entryway. He gets once more into bed. A couple of moments later, the entryway handle to his room starts to shake. On the opposite part of town, Martin's sister, Rebecca, Teresa Palmer, is spending time with her sweetheart, Brett, Alexander Di Persia. The following day, Martin is in the medical caretaker's office after he nods off in class for the 3rd opportunity in 7 days. Since the school can't snag Sophie, they wind up calling Rebecca down to the school. She and Brett meet with an authority from Kid Defensive Administrations, who updates her on the thing that has been going on with Martin. It is uncovered that Rebecca has a rough relationship with her mom after her dad deserted her a couple of years prior. Paul wasn't her genuine father, yet her stepfather. Rebecca goes to converse with Martin alone. He tells her that he hasn't been dozing off late. Brett drives Rebecca and Martin to Sophie's. Brett stays in the vehicle as Rebecca takes Martin to the house. As they are strolling, Martin tells her that Sophie has been conversing with somebody named Diana. Rebecca quits strolling and asks Martin where he heard that name. He tells her that he heard Mother say it. Rebecca lets Martin know that Diana isn't genuine, that she's somebody their mother made up. Sophie opens the front entryway and invites Rebecca and Martin inside. At the point when Sophie inquires as to why Martin is home so ahead of schedule from school, he tells her that Rebecca will explain to her why. Martin makes a beeline for his space to pack some garments, unbeknownst to Rebecca. Rebecca gets into a contention with her mom when she figures out that Sophie has been failing to take her antidepressants. Rebecca lets Sophie know that she's taking Martin over to her place for a couple of evenings. Similarly, as Martin strolls up with his get all set. Sophie starts to cry and begs Rebecca to allow Martin to remain. However, Rebecca takes Martin and goes to her place. Sometime thereafter, at Rebecca's place, she wakens to find Martin gone from her bed. She hears a scratching commotion and figures it should be Martin. She looks to where the commotion is coming from and sees the figure slouch over and scratching the floor close to the entryway of the room. Since Rebecca lives over a tattoo parlor, the illumination of the sign over the tattoo parlor radiates on and off each 10 or so seconds. Rebecca can see the figure at whatever point the radiance of the sign is off, and afterward it vanishes when the light returns on. The figure sees that Rebecca is watching it. Thus, it vanishes and afterward returns standing up before Rebecca, and as it charges towards her, it vanishes as the light returns on. Rebecca rushes to the light switch, similarly as the radiance of the sign switches off, yet she can flip on the light change to her room in time. She searches for Martin and tracks him down in the restroom, dozing in the bath with a spotlight on. The following day, in the wake of taking Martin to school, Rebecca and Brett go to Sophie's. Since Sophie is out getting things done, Rebecca and Brett head inside. Rebecca heads higher up where she goes over a case with data on Sophie and her previous spell in a psychological establishment when she was a little kid. At the point when Sophie was in the establishment, she met a young lady named Diana, who had an uncommon skin issue and couldn't go out into the light. The specialist gave an exploratory method to shoot Diana with a lot of lights, which made her pass on. Rebecca hears a clamor in her old room, and when she goes to check it, the way to her room closes shut and she is yanked up to the roof by Diana, who attempts to choke Rebecca with her own jewelry. Rebecca's shouts are heard by Brett, who can get the entryway open, and the light from the corridor makes Diana vanish and Rebecca tumbles to the ground. Brett lets Rebecca know that Sophie is returning home with Martin, so Rebecca snatches the case with the data on Diana and the two of them escape out the secondary passage. Soon thereafter, Sophie and Martin are investing some quality energy watching an old film. Sophie stops the film and lets Martin know that she'll be right back. Out of nowhere, Sophie proceeds to kill the lights in the room. Martin gets apprehensive and Sophie attempts to quiet him down. She continues to recount to him the narrative of her kinship with Diana. She lets him know that Diana is her companion and can remain assuming every one of the lights are switched off. Behind the scenes, you see Diana moving toward behind Martin. At the point when she shows up next to Martin, he goes ballistic and starts to attempt to turn on certain lights. Diana attempts to stop him, yet Sophie impedes her and Diana smacks Sophie, sending her to the floor. This permits Martin time to get to the front entryway and break. He goes to Rebecca's place. Brett goes to the store and gives Rebecca time to chat with Martin. Martin tells her that Diana is genuine. Rebecca recognizes that he's coming clean. All of a sudden, a thump is heard at the entryway. Believing it's Brett, Rebecca goes to answer the entryway and sees nobody there. Rebecca and Martin start to hear Diana in the walls. The very scratching sounds that Rebecca heard before started to come from the wardrobe in her room. She gradually moves toward the wardrobe entryway and turns on the light. Nobody gives off an impression of being there. Out of nowhere, Diana gets Martin's leg and attempts to pull him under Rebecca's bed, yet Rebecca can pull Martin back out. With Brett, Rebecca and Martin return to Sophie's. Rebecca attempts to persuade Sophie that Diana is dead, however that her soul is attempting to kill them. Yet Sophie disregards them and goes higher up to her space to fall asleep. Rebecca lets Martin know that each of them three will go through the night there. Brett will rest on the love seat and Rebecca will rest in a similar room with Martin. Rebecca goes to Sophie's room to tell her that she's going through the evening. As she leaves the room entryway, Sophie opens the entryway. She lets Rebecca know that she's happy she's going through the evening. Sophie snatches Rebecca's hand and truly slips Rebecca a note. After Sophie shut the entryway, Rebecca takes a gander at the note, which peruses "I really want assistance." Soon thereafter, Diana slices the capacity to the block. Brett goes outside with a spotlight to examine as Rebecca goes to the storm cellar with a breeze-up lamp to attempt to find the fuse box. Electric lamp no longer any of his concern and sending him to the floor. She starts to move toward him. However, he snatches his telephone and uses the light to sparkle her away. With his telephone before him, he utilizes it to ward her off. Yet when the light switches off, she shows up, smacking him once more. He can advance outside to his vehicle. As he passes under the dim parking space before his vehicle, Diana snatches him. She lifts him up over her head. However, before she can kill him, Brett snatches his vehicle keys and raises a ruckus around town for the vehicle caution. His vehicle headlights turn on, sending Diana away and drops Brett to the ground, scarcely saving his life. He advances toward the vehicle and drives off to find support. Rebecca and Martin are as yet secured in the storm cellar. She goes to a crate and uses scrap bits of paper to move the fire in the heater along. She leaves Martin by the heater and searches for provisions that they could possibly utilize. Martin finds an old bright light that he provides for Rebecca. She glances through the cellar and tracks down composing all around the walls of one segment of the cellar. Diana had been living in the storm cellar since it ceaselessly dimmed down there. Diana shows up and Rebecca finds that UV light can't hurt Diana since it's not adequately strong. Brett shows up with 2 cops. He remains outside by his vehicle while the 2 cops head inside. They can get Rebecca and Martin out of the storm cellar. Yet not before Diana kills one of the officials when he goes to look at the kitchen. Rebecca attempts to caution the other official that she really wants to utilize a spotlight to remain alive. Be that as it may, the official doesn't tune in. The official sees Diana and shoots her firearm at her. Yet Diana vanishes at whatever point the light from the shot shows up, making a weapon futile against her. Diana kills the subsequent official. Rebecca and Martin are going away from the house, yet Martin would rather not abandon Sophie. Brett comes to the entryway and Rebecca advises him to guard Martin as she goes to get Sophie. Rebecca advances higher up, yet is gone after by Diana. Diana gets Rebecca and loses her the 2nd floor overhang, where she falls hard on the ground floor, yet all the same she's generally safe. Diana heads downstairs and is going to kill Rebecca. However, Sophie shows up behind her with a firearm from one of the dead officials. Sophie lets Diana know that on the off chance that Diana at any point hurt any of her youngsters, she would make her compensation. Sophie puts the weapon to her head and pulls the trigger, similarly as Diana is going to prevent her from doing as such. Diana vanishes into dust as Sophie passes on. Rebecca wails for her mom. Afterward, Rebecca goes to the rescue vehicle with Martin and Brett. Brett solaces both of them as the capacity to the road returns on. Blurred to dark.